I'd like to begin today by wishing any fathers out there a happy Father's Day. Studies have shown how important fathers are in the lives of their children. They have found that many of the inmates in prison, the male inmates in prison, who have broken relationships with their fathers. And they've also found that women who do exceptionally well have had very positive relationships with their father. Well, our lectionary readings for today are not all that wonderful for Father's Day. First of all, we have the story of how Abraham sends his firstborn son out into the wilderness. Do you remember this story? Sarah is unable to conceive a child, so she urges her husband to have sexual relations with her maid so that he can have a child with her who will inherit after he dies. So Sarah eventually becomes pregnant, and she insists that Abraham send Hagar and her son away. Hagar had already run away once because Sarah was treating her so badly. We are told in this passage that Abraham is deeply troubled. He does not want to send his young son away. But God speaks to him and basically says, "Don't worry, I'll look after your boy and make from him a great nation." So he does what Sarah asks. The reading from Matthew is also not a great reading for Father's Day. We hear Jesus say, "Everyone, therefore, who acknowledges me before others, I also will acknowledge before my Father in heaven. But whoever denies me before others, I also will deny before my Father in heaven. Do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have come not to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and one's foes will be members of one's own household. Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever does not take up the cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Those who find their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it." That passage is a hard one to read any day of the year, let alone Father's Day. It is a hard passage to come to terms with, but my own life experience tells me that if we put God first, then we are more able to love the people in our lives in a healthy, life-giving way. I would have loved for my father to put God first. Perhaps then he could have found freedom from the alcoholism that was so destructive of our life together as a family. I know for myself that it was faith in God that continued to allow me to love my father and keep him in my prayers. I always knew my father loved me, and I had some good memories, particularly around going fishing. But I also have memories of my mother and us children waiting for what seemed like hours out in the car while Dad was in the bar. Imagine what it was like for my mother trying to keep 5 children happy in a car. I wonder if that was the day she found some food for us in the trash can. Dad was particularly hard on the brother that was a year younger than I was. I have 3 powerful stories of my relationship with my father that I'm going to share with you. I prayed for my father for many years that he would quit drinking. I prayed earnestly. Finally, I said to my Heavenly Father, "What's going on here? I pray and nothing ever happens. Answer my prayer, answer it soon, O Lord, in your mercy I pray." And I basically said I was ready to give up. I thought I heard from God that day. I believed there was a promise that my father would soon be free. I offered up praise. I said, "Thank you, O Lord, for what you're going to do. Thank you that my father is going to be set free to become the person you created him to be, the person he longs to be. That night I saw my father in a dream. In real life he had a big swollen stomach, which I imagine was caused by a liver that could no longer handle the alcohol being thrown at it. There were days when he ate almost nothing, but he always drank a great deal. In my dream, the swollen stomach was gone, but not only that, his face shone with joy and peace. The next day, my father fell and broke his hip. I was told he was near death, so I flew from Vancouver to Edmonton to be with him. His children gathered around his bed and prayed for him. Although I would have liked to thump one person over the head, as he read scriptures about the judgment on sinners that would come after death. Perhaps this brother scared my father so much he decided not to die. Or perhaps, as I like to think, it was our prayers that made a difference. My aunt, who was a nurse for many years, was very surprised when he lived through the night. The broken hip and the surgery to repair it led to complications. There was a blood clot, if I remember correctly. My dad did not know us. He did not know anyone. He swore at everyone, and boy, could he ever swear. He struck out at anyone who came too near, splitting a nurse's lip. He had to wear diapers, and he was incontinent. I wondered what was going on. How could this be the answer to prayer that I was so sure God had promised? 2 or 3 months went by. It was Christmas time. Doug and I and our children were planning to drive from Vancouver to Edmonton on Boxing Day. Meanwhile, my brothers and sister had gathered together at my parents' home on Christmas Eve. The phone rang on Christmas Eve. It was the hospital saying a miracle had just happened. My father, who had been gone from his mind, had returned to it, and they asked if someone wanted to come and pick him up and take him home. When we arrived, my father looked much like the man I'd seen in my dreams. His swollen stomach was gone, and his face literally glowed. There was a God-visited holiness about him that spoke of peace and joy. He spoke of how grateful he was for his children and our prayers. I'd like to tell you that the miracle he experienced changed his life for the better until the day he died. It didn't. My mother had moved on and had created a life for herself that did not include my father. He was disappointed and angry and started to drink again. He went up north to live with one of my brothers, eventually coming back to the city. Not long after that, my brother burned to death in a fire. The RCMP classified his death as a suicide. My father blamed himself and was tormented. By then, I was working as a minister, and I realized that if my dad was a stranger, I would have been trying to help him forgive himself and find some measure of peace. I had a bit of a problem doing that. Not only did my dad blame himself, but I blamed him too, probably for a different reason. I had to pray and ask God to help me forgive my father so that I could help him forgive himself. When I was ready, I wrote a letter. The next time I saw him, he was not tormented. He was at peace, and he spoke of how very much my letter had meant to him. We moved from Alberta to Ontario shortly thereafter. My father said when we were leaving that he never expected to see us again. We were gone over 2 years when I had a dream. In my dream, I was telling people that my dad had died when he was 74 years old. I've learned to pay attention to dreams when I speak in them as myself. I phoned the brother Dad was now living with and learned that Dad had been sick in bed for almost a week. Later that day, I was given an unexpected $300 and decided to use it to go back to Edmonton so I could visit my father. I think that was divine intervention, actually. We had a conversation about his death. He told me he didn't want a funeral and no blankety-blank minister. I told him that a funeral wasn't for him. It was for those who loved him. That we needed to gather as a family and share our memories and our laughter and our tears. So my dad said, "Okay, but you're the only blankety-blank minister I want." I'm told after that my father quit drinking and he made peace with God. He died a few months later, just a month short of his 74th birthday. And I led my brothers and sisters in a graveside service for him. My dad wasn't perfect, but I knew he loved me. When I became pregnant as an unmarried young woman of 18 years old, my dad said to me, he said, "Don't feel like you have to get married. You can come home and have your baby, and we'll support you while you go back to school and get an education so you can support yourself. Don't feel like you have to get married." I did get married, but I still really appreciated the fact that he loved me that much that he would say, come home, we'll look after you." Most of my brothers and sisters also felt loved, which is why they were willing to be there for our father, when he needed them. I have a feeling that he lived with a great deal of self-hatred. He'd made some mistakes in his life that were hard to forgive himself for. I wish he could have found the freedom he longed for at an earlier age, but it is never too late to turn to God and find the amazing peace and grace that God offers through the gift of forgiveness.